Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Make sure to like and subscribe to the channel for more interesting stories like these. Now, let's get into today's story video. Ada for laughing at my former stepmom and saying she is getting what she deserves. By the way, I'm a 16-year-old girl. Parents divorced because they married young and drifted apart. My father remarried and had additional children, but my mother did not. My stepmom and dad separated, which was fantastic since my stepmom insisted on my not having my own room because I evidently don't live there except for every other weekend, but her children do. She clearly preferred them and made it evident that she loved me less, telling me what to do even though it was not her prerogative. She constantly told me that growing up with divorced and stepparents was normal, and that I was a victim. My father and mother are remarrying after meeting as seniors. My ex-stepmother is freaking out and saying things like "you won't last," and bringing up the children my father and she had together. I laughed at her and told her she shouldn't be so concerned that she believes the way she treated me was acceptable. I told her that my mother was 100 times the person she would ever be and that, unlike her, she would make an excellent stepmother. I assured her that her children would have their own bedrooms and would not be treated as second-class citizens. I told her she shouldn't play the victim. She then sobbed and said, "I don't understand," and I wondered if I was being an a-hole since I was getting what I wanted and there was no need to rub it in. Story 2. Ada for calling my wife a hypocrite for making our son do chores when he's sick but not our daughter. Throwaway. Please accept my apologies for any errors. English is not my first language. My wife, 43, and I, 41, have 2 children, a 16-year-old son from a previous relationship and a 14-year-old daughter. My kid has lived with us full-time since he was 4 years old. To go back to the topic at hand, my kid has been suffering from cluster headaches for approximately a year. They run in my family. Every other month, he receives them. He was struck by one again yesterday, while I was at work and my wife was at home. When I went home in the afternoon, I discovered my son in the driveway hauling pots of plants inside. My wife loves gardening and plants and buys new ones on a regular basis, or rather trying to. He was plainly in discomfort, pale, moving slowly, with wet eyes and so forth. When I asked him what he was doing, he said my wife had requested him to assist her in moving things, but I didn't believe he was in any position to do so, so I sent him inside into bed. I went inside and questioned my wife about it, and she became enraged, telling me it wasn't a big thing for him and that she had him take one of his prescriptions. They help but can only do so much. So I informed her that she allows our daughter to miss 2 days of school every month and excuses her from any responsibilities while she's on her period, effectively being a prejudiced hypocrite. We battled for a long, and she complained that I was undermining her authority, but I persisted on leaving our son alone for the day and carrying the plants inside myself, which I would have done anyway if she had simply waited for me. Just to be clear, I don't object to my wife keeping our kid at home when she's sick. If she believes it's necessary, I'm good with it. I'm not sure what's worse, but I don't believe it was fair for her to force our kid to do this when he was in a lot of pain and grimacing with every movement. She also knows he's not very good at defending himself. But Ada for that point. Update. Hello everyone, I was requested to provide an update on this. I discussed the matter with my kid and wife and reached a choice. Wife. I asked her how everything went down. She said she gave him a tablet about midday when he began to feel poorly, then went out for a bit and only called up to him when she returned to see if he could assist. She didn't see him, so she assumed he was all right when he left. I was surprised she didn't check on him. She expressed regret and expressed a desire to apologize to him. Son, he assures me that his stepmother did not force him to work while he was unwell before. This was the first time, and although I was relieved, I went a bit more and asked him whether he'd ever felt inferior to his sister in his stepmother's eyes. He stated that he began to feel this way as a teenager, although not as a youngster, but he never informed me about it. He didn't believe he should express his emotions since nothing awful had occurred. I was astonished. We generally communicate a lot, and reminded him that he needs to tell me things like that, even if they seem insignificant in isolation. However, because of my wife's hazardous lack of care and my son's sentiments, I decided we would spend some time at my brother's to straighten things out. Son is disappointed, but he understands my choice. He's too lovely a child to be abused in any manner, and I don't want him to learn that it's okay to disregard your own well-being for the sake of others. I'm pleased of his charity, but don't want to see it exploited, particularly by family members. Thank you very much. Edit. In response to several inquiries, we have not relocated permanently. I just want some distance between my wife and kid. I've discussed this with my daughter, and she knows that there are difficulties between her mother and half-brother that need to be resolved, but she isn't sad about it. Story 3. AITA for telling my son I'd rather have his ex-wife as a daughter than him as my son after he got cut out of the will. My son Matthew had a daughter with his now ex-wife Josie 16 years ago. I had always considered Josie to be my own daughter, so when they divorced 7 years ago owing to my son's infidelity, I was torn and unhappy. Josie was estranged from her family, so my husband and I naturally took them in. Josie was an angel. She insisted on not having to do anything more than we had before taking them in, and even though she was upset, she remained cordial towards Matthew. My husband and I had a significant role in Ruth's upbringing, since Matthew remarried less than a year later and now has a 4-year-old boy after disowning Ruth. My husband was diagnosed with lung cancer 2 years ago, which was difficult on everyone, particularly Ruth. They were quite close. She informed him about her girlfriends and boyfriends before telling anyone else, and she had always wanted him to lead her down the aisle at her wedding. Matt seldom came and rarely returned our calls, claiming that we had other children and that my husband was not lonely. Matt called over last night to speak about inheritance. He never mentioned Josie or Ruth and implied the whole time that he believed he should receive more inheritance than his siblings. My husband and I exchanged uncomfortable stares until he decided to speak up. He stated that everyone would receive a slice, but he'd prioritize Ruth and Bonnie, one of our other grandkids. Matt became enraged and said that Ruth was a jerk and that his kid deserved better than her. My husband became enraged and stormed out of the room, declaring that he would not involve Matthew at all. Matt shouted back and turned to face me, claiming Ruth wasn't worth it because she'd simply grow up to be like her mother. I told him that I'd rather have her mother as my daughter than him as my son and demanded that he go. I'm receiving phone calls from Matt's wife and family friends stating that my husband and I overreacted and that he was upset because we were playing favorites. AITA? Edit. To clarify, Josie did not cheat on Matthew. Josie and Matthew met later in college and Josie was known as a party girl before that. Ruth isn't the product of an affair, but we are planning on getting a DNA test because what Matthew said has gotten under Ruth's skin. She was at the house when this occurred and overheard it. I had no intention of choosing Josie over Matt, then or now, and I never prevented Matt from coming. I try to make it very clear that when we took Josie in, we weren't selecting and choosing. We simply wanted her and our granddaughter to be secure and have a wonderful home. Update. My grandkids have characterized the scenario as messy. There was a lot that occurred, so I'll attempt to summarize everything in a single explanation. We had tried to speak to Matthew for many weeks after the incident, but we were greeted with silence. He and his wife would deny us at the door, and he never answered his phone. There was clearly something we didn't know from his side of the tale, but we can't make a decision based on something we don't know. I sat Josie down and asked her if she had any idea what was going on. She had never spoken much about her and Matt's marriage, and we had never inquired. Josie broke down and told us that their marriage wasn't perfect from the start, that Matt's adultery was nothing new, and that they'd move here because he promised her he would stop once he was closer to his family. She claims she didn't tell us because she was humiliated and didn't want us to turn against our son. Matthew stopped by our home inebriated a few days back, long after midnight. I took him to the basement patio since he persisted on chatting. He informed me that he suspected Josie of cheating on him from the start, but had no evidence or reason to believe it. He simply couldn't believe that such a beautiful ex-party girl would remain loyal. Josie being pregnant wasn't out of the ordinary for their bedroom life, but he couldn't believe it. His remarks made little sense, but he did state, "She's so gorgeous and I love her so much. Why would she remain faithful?" He began having affairs after Ruth was born, and Josie remained because she didn't want Ruth to grow up in a troubled household. He eventually began repeating that he messed up and that being a bad parent is the only thing he's good at, and that he can't disappoint anybody if there's nothing to look forward to with him. "I'm an owl, and there's nothing I can do about it," he remarked. "I'm not cut out to be the villain," he said as he contacted his wife for a trip home. "He's returned to ignoring us, and I'm at a loss on what to do." Ellie, his wife, has informed us that she has tried, but it is not a struggle we can win. To cut a long tale short, Ruth is 100% Matt's daughter, and it seems that we will have to raise our grandson as well. I hope you've had your fill of drama today.